All right, in studio, we have Dr. Mike Chichak. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing great, Joe. It's good to see you.
Yeah, so why don't you tell our audience sort of your specialties? What
Sure.
What's kind of stuff have you done?
Oh, man, a lot of things. So I'm an internal medicine doctor by day, I suppose would be a good way to put it, helping patients with all sorts of different things. And, I've done some different things in my life. My wife and I are real involved in the ministry world in the region. And beyond that, I'm an author and e-course developer. So, lots of different things, father of three, and lover of life. How about that?
That's perfect. Well said.
Thank you.
So, I don't usually get curious about mundane stuff. So when I bring you in here to talk about some health stuff, it's because I'm dabbling in some stuff I really want to get
I figured. Yeah.
And this whole series is about, I'm super into space exploration and the depths of the ocean, these, far-reaching places.
Sure.
And then you think about how little of a handle we have on our own being, our own mind, our own physical body. And
so true.
So do we really have any business kind of going into the vastness of space when we don't understand how this thing works?
Oh man, that's a deep question. Yeah, it really is.
So we're going philosophy today.
Okay.
You don't mind?
All right. No, I'm good. I'm
cool
an
with
open
that?
book. Yeah, absolutely. I figured it might get dangerous coming here today, so we're
Know
good.
it. See, you got the right state of mind. Coming
Absolutely. Let's go. Let's go,
right.
Joe. Let's go.
All right. So I delve into places that I try to make things better. I know I'm never going to be, like when you learn about a credit score and you learn what's the highest you can have.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
You know that there's a perfect segment where it's flawless, but body's kind of not like that.
Not
Do you ever
really,
see a flawless candidate come through your office?
No. I've seen some people that have gotten pretty darn close, but flawless, no. There's always something.
Okay.
That's hard, right? It's elusive.
Okay, I want to know this flawless person, or the profile of someone who you would consider real close to not having much to improve.
I think so much of it comes down to lifestyle choices, right? Eating habits to me are the biggest thing in the medical field that somehow go unpreached, right? It's always the mentality of, I need a medicine to fix me, which certainly, when appropriate, 100%. I prescribe medication all the time. But there is this big factor that we kind of ignore, the eating habits, the exercise component. So when I see patients that tend to be at or near optimal health, it really has a ton to do with they are super intentional about their eating habits, about their exercise regimen, and it really becomes a non-negotiable in their life. And that's what I see. Now you get into low body fat percentages, which really increases that level, because so much of the fat that's in our body, people look at it like, well, it just doesn't look good, so I need a bigger pants or shirt or whatever it is. But the reality is, we're talking about metabolically active fat, which is very different than just fat storage, right? So I look at those metrics for people and see where are we at with things, and I try to do my best to really help coach them into some of those healthy lifestyle choices, because at the end of the day, this really determines a huge part of what we would consider having a good quality of life, right?
Yeah.
And people neglect that all the time, and I get it, because it's not easy to do. It's not easy to do. It's actually really, really hard to do. So I would say it's simple, but it's really hard. Right, because
well, let me. I'm going to articulate that for people, because I always take this analogy of we have a tendency as human beings to vilify certain things and make things binary choices. And I look at health as sort of like balancing a swimming pool, right? You want to walk up to it, see what it's deficient at, add that chlorine in there, and it's like good, perfect. But then when you add the chlorine, it pushes this other thing off, and you're like, oh, I got to go balance that.
Yeah,
and then when you do that one, so there's some finesse to being able to do the math and to see how one thing interacts with another thing physiologically.
Yeah, absolutely. My wife and I just got done with a deficit phase in our eating, right? So, we go through these phases a couple times a year where we really eat really, really restricted. We don't splurge. There's no alcohol. It's just very strict eating. And then you look great. You're really excited because you look great, but then you are dying because you're craving food that you miss, right?
Yeah.
And then you reintroduce some of that food, and then all the other things come back. You feel sluggish. You look in the mirror. You're like, wait a minute.
Why did I do that?
Why did I do that, right? So there is this balancing, right? It is a real balance, and you have to really weigh out, no pun intended, weigh out what is more important to you. In a season, right? Because there's times, we went away last weekend. We do like a basically like twice a year we do like a little marriage getaway where it's just she and I. We go to a really nice place, and so we were leading up to that just because we knew we were going to eat really unhealthy. I mean, I'm not talking horrible, but for me, really unhealthy was chicken parmesan and pasta, which tastes amazing, right?
Yes.
It's so good, but I don't let myself do it very often because then again, you have the downside to go with it, right? And I don't think medicine is any different than that.
Right.
I mean, you have people that it's like you want the magic pill, but it really doesn't exist, right? So you have, let's say, diabetes. Well, we have medication to treat that, but there's side effects, but there's downsides to it, right? And it's reality. It is what it is.
All right, I'm going to frame this. You correct me if I'm wrong on this.
Sure.
Okay, so I've classified people into 5 categories.
Okay.
All right, so you have the very bottom rung, the unhealthiest rung, and I'm going to take those people who are suffering and have dependence, right? So they're suffering, they're in their pain, they're always on medications.
Okay.
There's really they're at the worst of the worst. They're deficient in all categories.
Okay.
The one right above that is going to be they've got some dependencies, but they also have some elements where maybe they've got some natural great genetics and they're overcoming some stuff, even if it's by default.
All right.
And they have the middle ones where a lot of stuff gone right and a lot of stuff gone wrong, so they're just kind of like hanging in there.
Yeah.
And then you have your survivors on the top part, where you have the people who, maybe look at their health, maybe they eat right, and they're able to overcome a lot of obstacles. And then you have your super people that if they learn what's right, they stick to it and they never deviate from that.
Sure.
Okay, is that about?
Yeah.
Someone walks through your door, you can kind of easily put them in one of those.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I agree with that. I mean, obviously everybody's on a spectrum. Everything's on a spectrum. I like to look at healthcare that way. I remember one of my professors in med school taught that concept. And that had to do with psychiatry when I was first introduced to it. He said everything in mental health happens on a spectrum. And he said, I would beg you to argue with that. He was talking to a group. And I thought, of course, I was a third-year med student, so you kind of feel like you know everything because
you've been introduced
to so many different things, but in reality, you don't know that much. So I said, well, what about a broken bone? That's certainly a binary thing. That's not on a spectrum. And he goes, but at what point in an injury does one cell of that bone become damaged to the point where we would look at an x-ray and consider it a fracture? And I said, shoot, he's right. He nailed it. But I think you're speaking about the same thing. So we put those divider lines in different places, and it's really doggone true. And one of the things that I have seen, at least in my practice and in my life, and I'm sure you have too, is that even the people that get dealt really bad stuff, sometimes it's just, call it bad genetics or bad luck. I mean, whatever. They got some difficult stuff to deal with, but there is something to be said about the mentality to overcome, and it's hard to quantify. I do think it really is.
For sure.
But when we see it, I think it's easy to recognize. And we tend to see in healthcare that those patients, for whatever reason, tend to do better than other ones. And I always I use the example of smoking cessation, right? I try to get people to quit smoking. It's one of the things I do. So every study that I've ever read about smoking cessation, it talks about, well, you could do nicotine patches, you could do Chantix, you could do bupropion. These are the common medications used for this stuff. And it's fine, it's helpful. Okay, great, you replace the nicotine, but all the studies come down to one thing. What is the person's desire to quit? That's the biggest factor.
Right.
So when you look at the people that are at the bottom of the spectrum in comparison to the ones at the top that you were mentioning, these 5 categories, to me, it really has so much to do with what is a person's will to overcome whatever is in their way, right? And that I think that's a big delineator for people.
Yeah, and what's important about those categories for me is, like, I teach health in other departments. Like, I'll teach financial health, right?
Yeah.
And so when you have those survivor categories, it's like, hey, I can send you some kind of crisis in the financial world, and your ability to survive it means that you are healthier.
Sure.
Where you have someone at the lower rung, you do something as much as, take a direct deposit and delay it by 3 days, and your world's
You're in
devastated.
trouble, right? You're in trouble. Yep.
And so, when I put it through that filter. So let me ask you a question. So if you were to take, and this would be sort of like who you'd expect to be able to survive an obstacle more. If you took a person that maybe was in that middle deal, in this neighborhood, was you'd have some criticisms of their behaviors, but they're kind of in the center.
Sure.
Versus someone who's lived in a remote village, in a remote population that's never ate all the most natural foods, never seen medicine in their life, and never had the introduction of diseases or whatever. Which do you think is a bigger survivor?
I would say the second one.
The Amazonian?
Yeah,
okay.
The Amazonian. I mean, they've been overcoming their whole life. They just didn't know it, right? They define that as normal. There's no dependency.
No drugs.
No drugs. No nothing.
All natural.
All natural.
Yeah. Escape lions and sicknesses and rain
imagine?
and in the elements and all that stuff.
This is our ancestors, right?
Yeah.
This is how it was.
Because it is the adaptability. And you know, some of the people that I talk to, and they go through what they feed their body and what they put their body through.
Yeah.
And the body's ability to survive all of that. And you have like super runners that eat all the great things. Their body's figuring out a way in both situations to live another day. That's just incredible. Amazing to me.
It blows my mind too. And it's so complex. I feel like, honestly, we just scratch the surface of it, and then we kind of feel like we know a ton about it because we study one metric related to it, and we say, oh, we were able to move the dial a little bit with this one metric if we do X, Y, and Z. But the reality is there were 55 other variables that we weren't even aware of, right?
Yeah.
And it's true. It's true all day long. And then somehow still the body adapts, it overcomes. I mean, it really is truly amazing to me. It blows my mind. I remember being fascinated with that in med school and just thinking, this is ridiculous. I mean, you study all day long. I mean, for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And it was like, okay, I just scratched the surface on the fingernail, right?
It's not, you don't have a lifetime enough to learn enough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's amazing. But I think that the Amazonian would win, at least in my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so let's get back to that binary that you had mentioned. I don't think from an information standpoint, and I know why it's done this way. I know a lot of doctors probably picture the keeping people alive and not going exceptional health is the way, because it's got to apply to the most amount of people.
Sure.
So when you talk about salts and lipids and sugars and all this stuff that scares people, don't do all of this stuff.
Right.
And a majority of the people, if they listen to that, will be at least okay. But it gives us that, it vilifies so many natural things and makes us afraid of them.
Yeah.
We get a really weird perspective on them.
Yeah, it's true. I do agree with that. I think in medicine, it's hard because of what you just said. You do have to make decisions. Well, it always comes down to risk versus benefit. That's really the fundamental decision-making factor in medicine. When you're prescribing something, if you're recommending an intervention, surgery, what is the risk versus benefit for that specific situation? And there's so many things that can enter into that, but those decisions have to be made based on controlled trials. Huge amounts of data go into these things so a recommendation can come out, and it is based on large numbers out of the population, right? So like a statin medication, you're familiar with that class, I imagine, like a torvastatin or rosuvastatin or whatever. There's a number of them out there for cholesterol management for anybody who's not familiar. They're super common, and some people really don't like them, like a patient perspective, right? They don't, if you Google things, you hear these horror stories that people go through, and unfortunately, things happen, right? But when you look at population data, you can see that, okay, the incidence of heart attack is really lessened, the incidence of stroke, incidence of peripheral artery disease, and these things gets lowered when a person's cholesterol panel is at a certain level based on statin intervention. So there could be 100,000 people that went into that trial, and they're measuring this metric, right? But to bring it back to your point, Joe, at every one of those 100,000 people, where would they fall at on that, that survivor spectrum that you talk about, right?
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, would be an interesting question to look at.
Yeah, it's a safer play because if they did follow, at least they wouldn't go into the disease category. They'd at least stay in that middle part where everybody's rescuable at that point.
Well, and I have patients too, just for the statin thing. It's like, listen, I have patients who eat nothing but grilled chicken and broccoli, and their cholesterol still looks like garbage. Well, if it's genetics, I mean, they're super fit, they're doing great with their life, they're making good choices. I mean, what are you going to do, right? You're going to put yourself at risk for a heart attack because you don't want to take a pill. I get it. I hear both sides of the argument totally. I understand it's a personal choice, a choice between you and your doctor, 100%. But when it comes down to medical decision making, we've got to look at the data points and say, okay, this is what the data shows, so this is what we use to make recommendations for people. But yeah, it's not perfect. It's not perfect.
Well, that's what I love about you, because everything you know is not absolute, and it's definitely, you are an artist of information that has to put it through so many filters to try to make good judgments.
It's not easy. I appreciate the kind words. I never heard quite that phrasing before.
Yeah,
an artist of information.
Yeah. Well, and the worst phrasing of it that I ever read. I went in, sitting into a doctor's office, and waiting for my appointment. Yeah. And on the wall it said, "Medicine is not a science, it's a practice." And that did not make me feel good as a person about to receive the services of a non-scientist.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. There's an art to it. There is, but there's science to it for sure. There's no question about it.
Worst doctor ever put that sign on the wall.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing, so hopefully it works out.
But I'm going to try a lot.
Right. Well, that's a scary thing. I remember being in residency, and I don't tell this story real often, but it is ridiculous, because you don't really know what you're doing when you're first starting out. You don't. You have supervision and people checking all your decisions and all this stuff. So there's protections in place, but you yourself, you're learning, right? I mean, you're not born a doctor. Shoot, my dad had a tree service when I was a kid. So I was going out cutting trees and chopping wood. I didn't know anything about medicine. Nobody in my family was in that field. So, but I remember when I was in residency, and I was so exhausted. You probably heard about the work hours they put residents through. It's ridiculous. And I had been up for so many hours, too many to count. And I remember this one day I was in the emergency room, and I was admitting a patient to the internal medicine service and taking their history. And this is an older guy who's being admitted, and he was going through some health problems. His wife's there in the room, and they're telling me the story of what they had gone through and all this stuff. And I'm standing in the room. I had been awake for so long. I was so physically exhausted. And this is just, it's horrible. I remember standing there looking at the patient and his wife, and they're thinking, this guy's at his best right now. This guy is going to take good care of me. And in my mind, I'm telling myself, for the love of God, do not fall asleep while you're standing up looking at them. And it's horrible. I mean, it shouldn't be that way. It isn't, but it's part of the way things work, right?
Yeah. It's well, and thankfully you had so many tandem jumps, and you had that oversight that you got so much of that.
Well, he ended up doing fine, just to be clear. He was good. The next day, of course, I got my sleep and we were all good. And there were other doctors on the team taking care of him that had rest at that point. So no, but it is hard. It's really, really hard. And you look at these things and it's like, okay, well, even in the face of adversity, I'm still going to do my best, right? And that's, to me, comes back to that spectrum you're talking about earlier, right?
So do you think humans are going to continue to live longer and longer? Do you think there's a threshold that our body just wasn't designed to go beyond?
Well, biblically, you talk about the 120 years, right? That's a big thing. I know there's a lot of people that really feel like that. Life expectancy has gone up for sure. It's I feel like it's plateaued over the past few years. And in my real true opinion of things, I don't see the metric moving a ton if we don't do something about the food that we eat in this country. I think it is really, 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 really unhealthy, and it's confused the heck out of people. They don't know. They have a hard time taking action on anything because there's so much conflicting information out there when it comes to food choices. And then you factor in a level deeper than that. It's based on capitalism, right? I mean, companies are out there marketing food because ultimately they want to have a successful business that makes money and provides for their family and their employees' families and all this, right? I mean, it's just the way it is, right? But the downside is I think the food has become so unhealthy that the chronic disease factor has just gone through the roof. And I was just reading a study, which you may have heard of because it got quite a bit of press. It was done through Harvard, and they're talking about by 2030, which that's not that far away, 50% of the U.S. population, that's 50%, will be obese. By 2030, 50%, half of the U.S. population. And then they said about 18% of the U.S. population will have what's considered severe obesity. So that's a BMI, body mass index, of 40 or higher, or 35 or higher with a chronic disease that's related to obesity, like diabetes, heart attack, heart disease, whatever, you name it. So the life expectancy question, we got some major barriers in front of us. I think we did really good expanding that coming out of like the Industrial Revolution. If you look back 150, 200 years ago, the big killers of people were injury, infection. I mean, if you look back into the 1800s, the biggest killer of women was death by fire or childbirth, right? They would have a significant injury falling into a fire preparing food, or 25% of women passed away from giving childbirth back in that era. Right now, somebody has a baby, you don't even really think about that. It's kind of like, hey, congratulations, how's the mom and baby doing, right?
Yeah, you'd expect something huge if somebody passed away during that.
It'd be a big, big deal. Yeah. So now we fast forward, and the biggest thing that kills people now is disease of lifestyle. Even cancers get factored into that in some capacity. So I don't know. I look at it in the next 10 to 20 years, and I say, if we don't do something significant, I don't know that we're going to make a lot of progress there. And that's where I think the whole class of drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, I don't know if you've heard of these injectable meds for weight loss. That's what they're aimed at, is to help finally get people to start choosing to eat less. That's what they're aimed at, and that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, but I see that as maybe just bringing the standard back to what it once was. I don't necessarily think that's going to extend us, down the line. Maybe with medicines in conjunction with that, you never know.
And I'm torn about it too, because I have patients that come in that are really, really, really overweight. They're struggling with it, and I talk to them about lifestyle changes, and they don't want to do any of it. But they give me the shot. I want the shot. I want the shot. And I'm like, okay, well, let's just look at things for a second, because what I see, because I don't really practice that way. I'm going to help you with your weight loss, but it's got to be based on you making lifestyle changes. Right. Because what you'll see is people will lose. Let's say you have a 400-pound person, they get on one of those shots, they lose maybe 30, 40 pounds, and that's it. They plateau because they've not actually made any changes to what they're eating so much. They're just eating a little less of it, which arguably is good, but certainly not great.
Right. And that's that dependency category. It's almost like I have a drug problem and I'm not going to die because I have Narcan.
Right.
And then you're looking and saying, hey, the Narcan might be bringing you back, right? But you're only existing there because of the power pill.
It's so true. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to use an analogy here, a little analog. And this is sort of like going from a technology thing, and we're going to try to make the human body fit into this framework. You ready?
All right. Yep.
All right, so early on when the solid-state hard drives came out, all right, they were super expensive, and they only had so many sectors that were only rewritable so many times.
Okay.
And old computers with analog hard drives, they didn't care. They didn't have an expiry on their individual sectors. So a lot of the technology were constantly looking at the sectors to see how they were doing.
Yeah.
And in a solid state era, every time you looked at it, even if you didn't do anything with it, it counted as a read. And just by checking in on that cell, right, you then depleted it, and they would go through the hard drive. So they started figuring out how to not stress unless that the weight of what you were stressing ended up had some kind of net benefit to it. So they left the hard drive alone so that it would last longer and not be in that perpetual state.
This is like checking your credit score, right? So
yeah, right.
You shouldn't do it unless you're serious.
So, that kind of led me into the human body of like how much of the damage in our human body is letting foods in that are doing damage or creating inflammations or causing repair that are needless. Like, when you're exercising and you're busting up some muscles, right? You're causing injury, but then on the other side of it, there's a net gain because the muscles get stronger, and on the longer term, it's better that you did that.
Right.
So give me your first reaction to that metaphor.
I see both sides of the equation. I think intentional damage. Gosh, this is like a can of worms discussion. You can go a lot of directions with it. So just to take your analogy. You're in the gym lifting, right? So you don't make progress if you don't break the muscle tissue down. You just don't, right? And that's where the phrase came from: no pain, no gain.
Yes,
that's the whole thing. But then at the same time, that muscle tissue gets regenerated, becomes stronger. It's a net benefit for the body. The other side of it, I suppose, would be more related to kind of the lazy factor where I'm avoiding it so that my body starts breaking down because of that, but doesn't get repaired the same way.
Yes.
Right? That's the other side of it. The eating, the inflammatory part of the conversation is complicated because their inflammation has so many roles in our health, and I think it's still an area that we're really beginning to understand. It's vast. But we eat a ton of pro-inflammatory foods as a part of our quote-unquote normal American diet. It's out there. So that part of it, the question comes back to, if I'm reading you right, Joe, it's kind of like, well, how much damage can you do before you can't really undo it, right? Mm-hmm. Is that kind of where you're going with it?
Yeah. You expensing energy on repairing things that weren't broke. You broke them by what came into your body,
right,
without the net benefit from having done it.
Yeah.
And just repairing the same segment of cells over and over and over again, until the blueprint for making that cell has been degenerated until it can't produce a great cell.
Yes, and that's an area that we don't have true understanding into. There's theories out there on aging that relate to this question that you're asking, because if you look at cell division and cell replication, I'm sure you've heard this before, but somewhere in the vicinity of every 7 years, we're technically like a whole new person, right? We don't have any of the exact same cells in our body that were present 7 years ago. So if you look at that strictly from one cell division to the next, nothing changes. It's all the same that we understand. And yet, if you extrapolate that out far enough, something does change. I mean, we can look in the mirror and say, well, I don't look quite like I did 7 years ago.
Copy of a copy of a copy.
Exactly. So there's errors that get introduced to that.
Right.
And it does kind of beg the question of, well, what does that mean? And then there's a lot of theories related to that. Does it have a role in cancer? I think, yeah, it does. Because, I mean, we see so many cancers don't happen until, let's say the prevalence of which happens later in life, right? But then there's also those lifestyle choices that have a major impact on those things. Let's just take the obvious one of smoking. Smoking, we know, causes tons of inflammation, tons of damage in the lungs. Just to name one organ system, there's so many other things beyond lung cancer, but everybody focuses on that. It's so obvious, right?
Right.
But then at some point, if a person stops smoking, let's say they've been smoking for 20 years, their lung cancer risk, yes, it does improve, but it does not ever become that of a person who never smoked, right?
Right.
And that's kind of like, well, shoot, what's the mental reward for somebody to go through the pain of quitting when they can't get back to that previous risk level?
Right.
That's a tough one.
Heck yeah.
I think that's a really tough one, right? And I'm in the business of talking people into this stuff, and I fully believe that, yeah, you should quit smoking, but it is really, really hard. But then, this is going to sound like I'm contradicting myself. There's studies out there, and this one is kind of like, wow, it speaks to the body's ability to repair itself. So there are studies out there that will say somebody has lung cancer. Let's say they're 60, 70 years old, not a young person, right? They've been smoking for decades. They're oxygen dependent because of this, and they have lung cancer from smoking. The research will tell you that if you can get that person to quit smoking, even though they have cancer, it's quote unquote terminal, they are more likely at that point, if they quit smoking, they are more likely to pass away from something else other than the lung cancer. So it's saying that we can actually extend their life by quitting smoking, even though you already have cancer. Because the conversation, if you ever do any kind of, you visit people in hospice care, or you meet somebody who has lung cancer, if they're still smoking, the argument is, well, I don't care at this point, I'm going to die anyway. I like smoking, give me the cigarette, I don't care. But we can actually tell them, wait a minute, we might actually be able to undo some of this if we can remove that thing from your life. So it does speak to the body's ability. It is a ridiculous ability to repair itself. It really is incredible. At what point does it reach the point of no return? That's That's a tough one, right? That's
yeah,
a tough
I love these questions, though. You're so open to it. It's my favorite. So let me get another topic. It's one of my favorites is the fasting, the cycles of giving our bodies a shutdown period to do things that the typical body does not get to experience. Right. I don't think people stop eating long enough for the body to ever go into that mode for real.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on fasting?
Well, I have a lot of them. I think, long story short, I would say it's pretty incredible. I definitely can't say I would recommend it for everybody. There are definitely medical conditions where, you probably shouldn't, or if you wanted to, you would need some real specific guidance on doing it, under doctor's care, dietitian. But that conversation aside, I think it is actually pretty amazing for so many reasons. I mean, the medical, you talk about reduced levels of inflammation throughout your body.
Yes.
Even, and I'm a big proponent of food fasting, right? But certainly even fasting something like sugar, if you do that, I could almost guarantee a person that their aches and pains will vanish within a few days. I mean, it's really remarkable, actually. So the person with rheumatoid arthritis, suddenly they might not feel like they need to be on their medication anymore. That's incredible. From eliminating sugar, that's a big deal. So there's that part of it. I think
honestly, I would bait somebody just to try it long enough to like take your wrist or your knee or whatever's ailing you and see what that feels like when you've removed inflammation from that area.
Oh, it's so true. I can speak to it in my own life. I have some foot pain that I deal with, which is a pain. I told you we just came off this deficit, so my wife and I, we were out. We had some ice cream last weekend. We had really nice meals. So when I wake up the next morning, I'm like, oh man, my foot is bothering me. Well, guess what? I'm back to clean eating since Monday. It's gone. It's gone. And that's just because, there's no more sugar. I don't really have that as a part of my daily life. So other than something you would find in fruit, that's about it. So you can see that happen so quickly. And we're talking that's within the course of less than a week. That's remarkable what your body can do. But I feel like we get so addicted to the food. And that's the part of the equation that people... It's like we know it, but nobody really wants to do anything about it. And it is true. It's actually, this is something I find interesting about the conversation, is if you look at the medications that are aimed to help an addict, so to speak, they work in the reward center of the brain, right? Dopamine, most people have heard about that, neurochemistry at this point. Well, the medications that I've mentioned earlier, the Ozempic class and all those, they actually work in that same reward center of the brain. The addiction center of the brain to help reduce those cravings. So if we can get people to actually start some of the fasting, I think it would be incredible for their health. Weight loss is a whole other factor with it. Now, the downside to me, outside of people who really just shouldn't do it for whatever reason, if you're insulin dependent, it is more complicated. Right. Certainly with type 1 diabetics, it can be challenging, right? But the downside that I see to it just in practical application is people tend to mess it up. They really mess it up. And I don't think they're doing that intentionally. They just don't really understand. So what I've seen is people will say they're intermittent fasting, but they've actually been gaining a ton of weight, right? And what they do is they don't eat for 12 hours, let's say, but then they eat these really unhealthy foods because there's this mentality that develops, well, I haven't eaten for so long, so therefore I'm building up this thing where now I can just eat whatever I want, which it sounds good, but it doesn't work.
No, mathematically it does not.
It doesn't work mathematically, but people don't look at it that way, so it's like, oh, I'm going to go have my cheeseburger and fries and ranch dressing and a milkshake, and it's like, wait a minute, that was actually like 3,500 calories you just took in. You only fasted for 12 hours. It doesn't work, right?
Right.
But people do that. They mess it up. So I think for the right person, if you're going to be really intentional about it, it actually can be an amazing part of a healthy eating structure. But there's different ways to do it, right? I mean, you've been doing this for a while,
Long
Joe.
time.
So what's your approach to it?
So I did something similar to you where I decided to come out one weekend and have some pizza, which I never eat pizza, and I really love pizza.
It's very good, yeah.
And so I spent some time on a Saturday watching football games, eating pizza.
Yeah.
And the way that I watched my brain flip in that moment and get super aggressively addicted to what I could not stop eating the pizza. Like I could have eaten the entire pizza.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking like I went from having to remember to eat because I can't remember the last time I ate to I could probably eat for the rest of the night if I kept feeding this types of food into my body.
Incredible. Yeah.
And you learn something about it because that wasn't intentional.
Right.
But it was that little devil in your brain that,
Right.
you know, just was forcing you to do something against your will.
Yeah, it's so true. So when you do it, because I know, and I'm always following you on Facebook and whatnot, and, you know, looking at your fasting and all this. So how do you structure it for you personally? Is it like do you do 1 day no food? I know there's like a 5 and 2 model that people do sometimes.
So I have a pretty complicated cycle, but I'll kind of give you the simple version of it. So in a regular week, I do a 1 meal a day, 24-hour fast where I'll eat a dinner and that's it.
That's it, yeah.
And then on the weekend, I will load up on all of my whole grains, all of my vitamins, all my fruits and vegetables and whatever, so I can get, you know, tons of absorption
That's
when
good.
I've got that extra stuff in my body. So I'll do that for a couple weeks, and then I will do a long fast, a 72-hour or greater, about once every quarter.
Yeah.
And I will go so long that my body feels good. If I start getting headaches or I feel like trash, I'll just go right off of it. It's not about the time so much.
Right.
As if my body tells me it's time to stop, I
Yeah.
do. But I'll go as long as it keeps giving me the good output along the way. You know, for the most part, because of what I do, I have to make sure that I don't lose weight too quickly. If I lose any more than 0.2 of a pound in a day, I know there's something bad going on, and I got to change it up and get myself back in order again.
That's good. Well, and I think what you said is really important, because when we're fasting, when we do eat, in the midst of that, we really have to be intentional that we're getting the right nutrition. And that's the part that I think you have to really be intentional about that. So that's a part of things that is very easy to overlook when we have so many high calorie but nutrition poor foods available to us. You know, so the whole grains, the minerals, you know, your vitamins, fruits, vegetables. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but it's not too often that I really crave vegetables. I mean, I definitely eat them, right? But to sit there and say, man, I really want a carrot right now, it's not me.
Well,
some people, yes. But,
and honestly, if I deprive myself right, I actually start to crave like a carrot. I'm thinking that's the sweetest thing I've had in a month.
Yeah, they are
know?
high in sugar, right? It's true. Yeah. I know. I joke with my wife because we call her a rabbit. I mean, she eats so healthy, it's ridiculous. And I mean, and we both do, but a snack for her could be broccoli raw, and just that's it. There's nothing. Just that's it.
She's a specimen.
I'm telling you, and you know my wife. I mean, she, you know, it's impressive. I'm very thankful for her, but I don't crave that stuff. So that being said, I have to be really, really intentional about getting it in my diet, because craving or not, you still got to get it in there, right? It's very important.
And when we hand select what we're going to eat, so I hit all of my marks, it is never something that would appear on anybody's menu. So if you just eat at a restaurant, you are 0% chance going to get what you actually need.
Right. Well, it's so true. And I counsel people about this all the time. They come in for weight loss and they say, well, what can I do when I go out to eat? And I'm thinking, okay, that's the first problem, because it's very hard. And if you look at a typical restaurant menu, you almost have to order a la carte if you're going to have a shot at it.
For sure, 100%.
Yeah. It's to just say I'm going to take this and right off the menu. Oh my gosh. And I think my wife and I had to just get comfortable with it. Like, okay, we'll tell the waitress, hey, we're going to have some particularness to our order, and it is what it is, because I know the consequences of not doing that, right? And to me, that's what's important is, we'll taste good now. Maybe I won't feel awkward when I'm ordering now, but I'm going to regret it tomorrow. And that's not worth it to me, right? I've been through that cycle enough times to know I really want to go. I want to improve myself. That's a big part of living.
Now, speaking of cycles, I've gone in and out of the understanding of this several times, and I want to see if you can give me some of your expertise in here. Stinking seed oils. Like, I got super fixated on, like, what are you cooking it in and whatever. And then I read a bunch of stuff that it's not as inflammation causing as whatever. What are your feelings?
I think the simplest thing that I've seen to be really true, proven over and over again, is olive oil is really solid. I mean, for long-term health, it's so calorie dense, though. That's the thing that can be hard about it. I mean, any oil is calorie dense, so I'm not honestly too particular on those things, because I look at it from a macro perspective, macro in terms of, zoom out on life, but also macronutrient. Right. And that's the challenge that people don't often see is, I can't tell you how many times I've had people tell me, well, I don't hardly eat anything and I'm still gaining weight. And it's, okay, well, let's look at what you're eating, because you might only have something that's big, but it's slathered in oil. So from the macro perspective, it doesn't really matter what oil it is, because it's going to have a ton of calories in it. So if you're eating something that is quote unquote healthy, that doesn't help you lose weight, you've kind of shot yourself in the foot, because now we're introducing more metabolically active fat into our body, which is going to be a big contributor to chronic disease states, right? So that being said, I do think some of the oils I try to, like canola oil, I try to minimize that one. I just think it's really
super refined.
Yes,
that kind of thing.
It's, and the thing is it's in food, so you really have to get good at reading labels and being diligent from that perspective, because stuff's in there, and you might just have to make the choice to not eat something, right? Some of the non-fat stuff I try to stay away from, just because it is so refined. But the seed-based ones I would say are better. But again, it comes down to portion size. A tablespoon of olive oil has something like 120 calories in it, and nobody uses 1 tablespoon. It's almost impossible. It's just in salad dressing, right? You have 1 tablespoon is a big chunk of your daily calories. And I look at it, if somebody's on an 1,800 calorie a day diet and they have, let's say, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, that's over 10% of their whole day's calories. And it didn't fill you up at all. You don't even know it. 2 tablespoons, right? It's gone, but your body knows it. It accounts for it, and it stores it or does whatever it's going to do. And then you're left wondering, well, why am I not losing weight, right? So I counsel people a lot on macronutrients, and just getting really, really dialed in on what's going into their body, because it's not something that we feel like we should do intuitively. I don't think it comes naturally, because in my mind, I go back to when we were the hunter-gatherer, right? So you didn't see a hunter-gatherer out there with MyFitnessPal logging their food, right? It wasn't a thing. So, but yet they were crazy fit and lean, and chronic disease, it really wasn't there.
They were getting eaten by stuff.
That's true. Yeah. So there's a counter argument. So maybe they didn't live long enough to have diabetes diagnosed, right? So I'm with you 100%. But their body fat percentage was like 7, so I think they were doing pretty good.
Yes, but as you pointed out, like if there's one contributor that's adding to ill health, that overweight, that BMI on the upper side of things is probably it.
Yeah.
So here's forward-looking future things. So eventually, artificial intelligence and sensors on the body, you'll be able to take real-time blood, compositions and exactly what's going on. Now, are you looking forward to that era, or you think that's going to be our undoing?
Oh man, I feel like it's inevitable. Which is a little bit of a painful statement, but I think it's inevitable. I think it will have pluses and minuses. The part that scares me is, it's like putting a little bit of power in the hands of someone who doesn't know what to do with it, like a 12-year-old behind the wheel of a car. Probably not a good idea, right? It's not that they're not intelligent, they don't know what they don't know. So when you have, when you're ignorantly ignorant, right? You don't know what you don't know, and then you get a little piece of information, it's kind of like, well, I know everything now, but actually you just know enough to be dangerous.
Right.
So that's what it comes down to for me, because and I've lived through the era of when I was in med school, the internet was definitely there, but not like it is today, right? So there was so much more trust in the doctor coming in the room. It was kind of like the doctor would say whatever, and then patients, okay, perfect, whatever the doctor says, that's what I'm going to do. So now it's changed where it's more from the standpoint of, well, I Googled this and I read about it. So now, right? So then I look at AI is just going to extrapolate that same thing. And
here's a better version of it. They
Mm-hmm.
wear the sensors. They're your patient. So it is sending you the information, just the raw data.
Yeah.
So you don't wait for ailments to see them. You can see that, John Smith, this happened to him last night when he's sleeping. Call him in because I saw it happen.
I think that could be really powerful when it's done well. If it's overloading doctors, because it's just work overload, information overload as it stands right now.
The AI is going to help you go through it, though. You're only looking for certain things.
I think it will. I think it could be incredible for disease prevention. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the one thing that I look at is, just to pick one, is pancreatic cancer. If you look at the data on pancreatic cancer, we have not improved the mortality rates since the 70s, which is ridiculous. And the reason is, at the time of diagnosis for most people, it's already spread. And it's horrible because the tumor might be like the size of, not even the size of a dime. So you would think, well, we could resect it. So they do resect it, but they didn't get all of it. So we don't have a great way of detecting it, right, early on. So if you could have some metric that AI could detect whatever it is, and you wear a sensor on your body or something, I could see it being really, really incredible. You could say, oh, shoot, there's one cell. We need to zap that cell.
Right.
Get you in here. We're going to zap it, and then it's cured before it's even a thing. Amazing, absolutely. But I think we're a good ways away from that still.
Yeah. So here's another invention that doesn't exist, but would be pretty cool. See how you feel about this. So I got a 3D printer that can print something in any composition that you want, every material. So like when you need some food, like your little sensors send what you're deficient in, and it prints you a little burger slab, a little cube.
Yeah.
Right. And you just eat the stuff that your body needs.
I like that.
Super efficient.
Yeah. You let me know when you're ready. I'm going to invest in that one. That sounds good. That sounds good. Actually, I think that would be incredible because there is a role that genetics plays in our health and in our eating and in our, our body fat composition, muscle composition. I mean, you get one guy who goes to the gym and lifts and, they're throwing up 400 pounds like it's nothing, and the other guy lifts their whole life and can't put up 150 pounds. Well, clearly there's some genetics in the situation, right? So that would be amazing because you could look at those nutritional deficiencies. What do you need? How can we tweak it? And if you could make it taste good, now you're really
any
talking,
consistency.
Right? Yeah.
You can make it meat. You can make it vegetable. Whatever you're hankering,
amazing.
You can make it be.
Yeah. Well, I have said jokingly, one day when I get to heaven, I want to ask God why carrots don't taste like Snickers bars, right?
It's true. I mean, you could totally do it.
Why not, right? Just make the carrot into a Snickers bar. Let's do it. Yeah.
Think of how many people would eat healthy if it tasted the way that it should.
I mean, you would have a major win on your hands with that one. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be cool.
So one of the guys I run with, he is much taller than I am. And we run together, and he has a much wider stride than I do.
Yeah.
So you got to think of it as my stride. I'm running almost twice the amount in order to keep up with him.
Right.
So you're 400-pound lifter guy.
Yeah, it's not fair.
Right. It is really not fair.
Not fair.
So there has to be some equalizers, not just in the taste of food. Let's give me some advantage somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. Yeah.
So so that advantage might come in some kind of like virtual reality immersion where they put us into the simulation.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you think our bodies would do if we were didn't have to move around only but to have our minds race around in a simulated deal? Would we need a lot of this structure? Could we do without it?
Well, to me, it comes back to the survivor question because I'm picturing you're in this thing that, yes, your mind is transported somewhere else, but the only way to really equalize it would be if your bodies experience the same amount of fatigue, right? Equivalent fatigue. So you're running at whatever pace you're running at. Meanwhile, your buddy who's 6'3" and could pass you in a second is not experiencing the same level of fatigue because they can take one step for your 1.5, right?
Well, we're going to cut legs off. And we're going to let the running experience be perceptive running, right? So you'll be running like you do in a dream where you're not really running.
You're not really running. You're running. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perceptive running is a little slower if you guys have not had that experience.
I feel like this one always gets me because I just feel like it removes consequences, which I don't feel like it's compatible with reality, right? It's just this weird thing where it's like you can go live in some alternate universe and make all these decisions, and it messes with my head. I think it does for a lot of us, right?
Right.
We watch these shows where it's like, is that good? Maybe? I don't know.
But if the brain doesn't know that there's an outside of it, like what does it care whether or not they cut off your limbs? You don't use them anyway.
So then I come back to reality because I'm thinking, well, now you're dealing with, you have amputations, which might sound simple. It's not simple. Now you have wounds that are developing, infections developing. Meanwhile, the mind's not aware of it. So the person's getting eaten alive by, MRSA, and now they're dead in this pod, having a great time while their mind's running, right? And so the practical comes back to me, and it's like, well, that doesn't really quite work itself out. So
how far would you have to cut up before infections weren't a thing? Like, are you just ahead
at
that
heart,
point?
You have heart and lungs.
Well, we can replicate that. We can put a little pump right here by the artery and cut everything else down, right? Because there wouldn't need a lot of blood. You're missing half.
But you'd have to be able to produce it, which requires bone marrow. So you'd need that, right?
You need a little bone marrow. So maybe have a stub
spleen
out the
would
other
be good.
side.
You don't have to have a spleen, but it is a good thing to have. You need an immune system, right? And a thyroid, that's important. Or you could supplement it with Synthroid.
You are ruining my dream here. I thought we were going to be able to head in a jar.
I messed it up, Jeff.
See, I told you we were going to go down to crazy town.
We did, yeah.
And you were an active participant.
We sure did. I have developed an e-course that is aimed to help people that are struggling with type 2 diabetes. So it's a really high impact, high action, high accountability course. And it's totally online. So what I'll tell you, if you go, it's basically my name, michaelchichak.com. So ChiChak. If you go to that website, you can actually book a one-on-one consult with me. I can tell you if the course is right for you, some questions, we'll figure it out together. If you mention that you connected with me on this show, I'll give you a 30% discount. But it's definitely a very, very, very high impact course. So it's designed just to help people really overcome type 2 diabetes and get some freedom in their life from that.
All right. And is that audio video you can get from the website? Sweet videos and watch them.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really great. And it came out of a passion for me because I guess part of the reason I talk with such passion about this stuff is because my father, who's now passed away, he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes when I was in 5th grade. It was just a crazy story. He passed out at work one day and didn't know what it was. I was in 5th grade, right? So a long story short, type 2 diabetes, and if you fast forward all these years later, he passed away from complications of it. And I felt like, man, there's something where our healthcare system is just lacking at getting people what they need to figure out how to thrive with this whole thing. So this is one of my attempts to just help people with that. So that's where it
now
comes
type
from.
2 diabetes, what is it with the pancreas that is messed up?
So it really comes more from insulin resistance.
Okay.
Strictly speaking of type 2, basically the best analogy I've heard to put it in really simple terms is the body gets so tired, the pancreas gets so tired of having to produce insulin at such high rates over and over again from surges of blood sugar surges and simple carbohydrates that eventually it just kind of tuckers out. So you see in the peripheral tissues, that would be tissues outside the pancreas, that they develop a resistance to insulin, which is native to your body, but the pancreas also starts to produce less insulin. So this is why people end up on insulin, is because you have to get basically supra-therapeutic doses of insulin to get the body to have the same response that it should have to a much lower dose. But this is also a big part of why the metabolically active fat is really, really, really bad for us. And we don't focus on it enough as a culture. We look at appearance and, oh my gosh, you're overweight and all this, which is certainly a thing, don't get me wrong, but the metabolically active fat is where we see the chronic disease development start. So, but anyway, that's kind of a short answer, I suppose.
So is it, percentage-wise, is that something that you can bounce back to pre-levels? Or is it once you're there, yes, you're there for good?
Well, I would argue that for a lot of people, you can get back there. It definitely requires a lot of hard work. It really does. But this also helps to explain why you see some people that really aren't that heavy and get type 2 diabetes. And then some people are, very, very morbidly obese and still don't get diabetes, because it has a lot to do with our ratio of muscle tissue, lean muscle mass to metabolically active fat. And that's something that I think just doesn't quite get the attention that it deserves, because we don't think about it in our culture, right? It's like, but we're talking about the fat that's actually inside your abdomen, not everybody can pinch an inch. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying actually in your abdomen. That's the stuff that's metabolically active, and we're learning now that there are so many hormones that get secreted from this that lead to the chronic disease development. It goes beyond diabetes, your heart disease, fatty liver, I'm sure you've heard of, Joe.
For sure.
So it's a big, big deal. But I think the reality is there's so much that can be done for it. And it pains me to say it, but I don't think that our medical system is really structured to intervene properly in a person's life, because we're so taxed for time. We just, I'm lucky if I get 15. I mean, I'm lucky if I'm in the room for 15 minutes. That'd be rare. You know, it's a 15-minute appointment. If I'm in the room for 10 minutes, and I feel like it's wrong, to be honest with you, but this is the way it is. So this is my aim to help overcome some of that problem and just get some tools in people's hands.
Beautiful. Well, Mike, thank you so much, buddy. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.